I never thought my aunt's death would change the direction of my entire life. She was a quiet woman, reclusive even, but her presence had always loomed large in my childhood. Aunt Miriam wasn't the kind of person you forgot. She was precise, mysterious, and always spoke as if she knew something the rest of us didn't. My parents said she worked for a private organization, which sounded suspiciously like the kind of euphemism people use when they don't actually know the truth. When she passed, I hadn't seen her in nearly 7 years. I expected nothing more than a polite mention in her will, maybe one of her antique books or that silver pendant she always wore. Instead, I got a call from a law firm in the city, asking me to come in immediately for a private reading. The tone of the lawyer's voice carried an odd tension, a mix of duty and curiosity. The office was as sterile as her memory. Glass walls, metallic furniture, no warmth. The lawyer, an older man named Mr. Devereux, shuffled through a stack of papers, clearing his throat with deliberate precision. Then he looked up at me, eyes sharp behind his frameless glasses. "You are the sole beneficiary of Miss Miriam Lakewood's estate," he said. "But there are conditions." Conditions. Course there were. He slid an envelope across the table. The wax seal bore a crest I didn't recognize, a stylized letter A intertwined with a serpent. Inside was a handwritten letter, in her familiar cursive. "My dear Rowan, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. I've left you everything I have, my home, my accounts, and my unfinished work. But you must live as the person I always knew you were meant to be. 1 year, Rowan. 1 year as her. Complete what I began, and the truth will be yours. If you refuse, the estate reverts to the foundation. I hope you choose to understand. With love always, Miriam." My throat went dry as I read it again and again, trying to make sense of her words. As her. I looked up at Mr. Devereux, but he offered nothing. No explanation, no clarification. Only silence. "There's an attached clause," he said after a moment. "You are to report to Lakewood Industries, a corporate branch that Miss Lakewood owned, for employment under the identity she prepared for you. The board is aware of the arrangement." I almost laughed. "You mean I have to work for her company? As someone else?" He adjusted his glasses. "Not just someone else. As the woman she believed you were." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him right. The room suddenly felt smaller. "That's insane." He didn't disagree. Perhaps. But she was very specific. "The trust cannot be released otherwise." A week later, I stood in front of her old mansion, the one I hadn't visited since I was a teenager. It was still as imposing as I remembered, its windows like watchful eyes. Inside, her study was untouched, filled with papers, sealed boxes, and that faint scent of sandalwood she always carried. I found more letters there, fragments of her research, journal entries, and documents signed with the same serpent crest. They mentioned something called Project Cassandra, a corporate experiment blending behavioral psychology, identity reconstruction, and biochemical enhancement. It sounded like science fiction, yet her tone was deadly serious. And then I found the file with my name. It contained government-style forms, photos of me I didn't remember ever taking, and even a medical authorization signed by my aunt years ago. In bold red ink, across the top, was written, "Subject R. Lakewood, Identity Reassignment, Phase 1, Hormonal Transition." That night, I sat in her office chair, reading through her notes until dawn. My hands trembled as I read her last entry. "He thinks he's just my nephew. But I've always seen through him, the way he looks at himself in mirrors, the way he hides what he doesn't understand. He won't believe me now, but he will. Once he begins the treatment, once he becomes who he was meant to be." I didn't know whether to feel betrayed or seen. I wasn't hiding anything. Was I? The next morning, I received an email from Lakewood Industries, confirming my onboarding for a specialized research position. The HR packet included everything: ID badge, corporate housing details, and even a name tag, one that didn't bear Rowan but Rhea Lakewood. I stared at it for a long time. The name looked foreign yet familiar, like something that belonged to another life I had forgotten. By the end of the week, I signed the agreement. Maybe it was greed. Maybe curiosity. Or maybe deep down I needed to know why my aunt believed I wasn't who I thought I was. When I stepped into the corporate tower that following Monday, the receptionist greeted me warmly. "Good morning, Ms. Lakewood," she said. Felt strange. Not wrong but unreal. And that's how it began, my corporate sentence. A year of becoming someone else. Someone my aunt believed was already inside me. The first day felt like entering another dimension. Sleek glass corridors, humming lights, and faces that seemed to know more about me than I did. Everyone at Lakewood Industries treated me as though I had always been there, as Ria. No double takes, no confusion. My ID, my email, my workspace, all matched that name. Even the HR database listed my gender as female, my photo slightly altered, softened in a way that unsettled me. The department I was assigned to was called Behavioral Adaptation Research, a branch of something my aunt had founded years ago. My supervisor, Dr. Silas Moreau, was a tall, methodical man with the unnerving calm of a surgeon. His office was filled with subtle hints of Miriam. Photos, awards, books annotated in her handwriting. I realized he had known her intimately, maybe more than I ever did. "Your aunt was a visionary," he said that first morning, his voice low. "And she believed in you. You've been selected for the Cassandra Protocol continuation." "The Cassandra Protocol?" Yes. He nodded, sliding a folder toward me. Inside were documents stamped classified internal study. Phase 2 implementation. It outlined an experiment in identity immersion, combining corporate behavioral conditioning with biochemical modulation, using hormone therapy to explore gendered cognition under stress. The goal: understand empathy, adaptability, and perception within enforced identity realignment. I couldn't tell if it was psychology or madness. "Your aunt began it with herself," Moreau continued, almost reverently. "She changed her entire identity to study behavioral alignment. She lived as someone else for over 2 years. You're here to complete what she couldn't." My pulse quickened. "So you want me to take hormones for research?" He smiled faintly. "Not just take them. Live them." The first injection came that afternoon. It was almost ritualistic. A sterile room, cold air, and silence except for the hum of machines. The nurse, a woman named Lydia, explained it clinically, though her eyes were oddly gentle. "You'll feel small changes at first. Warmth, sensitivity, maybe mood shifts. Just let them happen." It wasn't fear that struck me then. It was the knowledge that I had signed this willingly, that I had agreed to become someone else. Days turned into weeks. The company schedule was rigid. Mandatory therapy sessions, biometric monitoring, and behavioral workshops focusing on emotional intelligence and interpersonal communication, all under the pretense of corporate empathy training. Yet I could feel it in my body. Subtle shifts that went beyond training. The first time I caught my reflection and didn't immediately recognize myself, I froze. My jawline seemed softer. My voice, when I spoke to test it, sounded lighter. Not high but smooth, like someone tuning a familiar instrument to a new frequency. I told myself it was placebo. Had to be. But the HR assistant, a kind woman named June, started calling me Miss Lakewood with such casual ease that I stopped correcting her. Even strangers in the building looked at me and saw what they expected to see. The corporate mirror room, a strange chamber where participants were told to study themselves objectively, became my daily nightmare. I could stand there for hours, trying to see Rowan through the reflection, and each day he was fading. I tried to call my parents once, but every time I did, I hesitated. What would I even say? That I was working under a fake name, taking hormones, and slowly losing track of who I was. They'd think I'd gone insane. Maybe I had. Dr. Moreau seemed pleased with my progress. "You're adapting faster than anticipated," he told me during a review session. "The hormones are aligning your neural patterns beautifully. Your aunt would be proud." I didn't want her pride. I wanted answers. But the more I searched her notes, the more cryptic they became. Phrases like "identity is performance," and "the soul has no gender," only layers. I began to wonder if she had ever intended for this to be research at all. Maybe this was personal. Maybe this was about me. My dreams turned vivid. Flashes of memories I didn't remember living. A young girl in a white dress, laughing beside Miriam. A voice calling out a name that wasn't mine. Rhea. Each time I woke, my heart raced, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a dream. That maybe once I was her. One night, as I walked through the lab after hours, I found a sealed observation chamber with my name, R. Lakewood, on the access list. Inside were video logs labeled Subject Transition 01-14. Played 1. My aunt appeared on screen, her expression tender but firm. Rhea, she said softly, looking straight into the camera. If you're watching this, it means the process has begun. Don't fight it. The person you think you are was a mask. One you learned to wear to survive. But the one beneath it, that's the truth I wanted you to see. The recording ended abruptly. My reflection stared back from the dark screen, pale, tense, eyes wide. And in that moment, I didn't know which name belonged to me anymore. I stumbled out of the lab, trembling, whispering her name. Not Miriam but Auntie, like when I was a child. I wanted her to answer, to tell me what she'd done to me. But the only response was the soft hum of the fluorescent lights above me. I didn't know it then, but the challenge wasn't just surviving the corporate sentence. It was surviving myself. 3 months passed, though time had stopped meaning much to me. I existed in a strange, controlled rhythm. Wake, inject, report, analyze, reflect. Every day, I told myself I was still Rowan beneath it all. But the mirror didn't agree. My body had begun to shift in ways I couldn't ignore. My features were softer, skin smoother, even the way I carried myself. Lighter, quieter. I tried to overcompensate, lowering my voice when I spoke, choosing clothes that looked neutral, but even then, people responded to me differently. Doors opened for me, eyes lingered, conversations changed their tone. The world had started treating me as her. At work, Dr. Moreau's experiments deepened. They no longer focused solely on physical adaptation, but emotional response. I was placed into scenarios meant to test empathy, stress tolerance, and identity cohesion. Each one was recorded, dissected, and scored by an AI that measured something they called authentic alignment. Every week my alignment score rose. "You're stabilizing," Moreau said once, watching me through the glass of the observation room. "The more you surrender to the role, the closer you get to what Miriam wanted." But what did she want? I demanded. To erase me. To make me forget who I am. He hesitated. "She wanted you to understand who you were before you started pretending." That night, I sat in the corporate apartment, a pristine white space with no traces of personality, and stared at my reflection again. My hair had grown longer, curling slightly at the ends, and I found myself touching it absently. There was something hypnotic about the change. I couldn't decide if I hated it or if it was relief. The struggle to maintain the old self had become exhausting. The next morning, I arrived at work wearing one of the company's standard blouses instead of my usual button-down. No one commented, but I noticed the ease it brought me. Fewer stares, fewer questions. It was as though I had stopped fighting a current and finally let it carry me. June from HR began inviting me to lunch. She talked openly about her life, her frustrations with management, and her admiration for my aunt. "Miriam used to say we all wear armor," she told me one afternoon, sipping her coffee. "That gender is just one layer of it. You remind me of her, quiet on the surface, but full of storms underneath." I smiled faintly. It was the first genuine smile I'd given in weeks. I didn't realize how much I missed being seen, even if the person being seen wasn't Rowan. Slowly, the changes became internal, not just physical. I started feeling emotions more vividly. Sharper empathy, deeper melancholy. Movies that once left me unmoved now brought me to tears. I found comfort in music I'd never liked before, voices that felt like they spoke directly to the version of me that was emerging. My therapist at Lakewood called it emotional congruence, a sign that the hormonal and cognitive adaptation were sinking. But there was also fear, a growing anxiety that I was losing something essential. When I looked at photos of myself before this began, it felt like looking at a cousin, not me. I recognized the face, but not the person behind it. I caught myself signing Ria instead of Rowan on reports. First it was a slip. Then it became habit. One evening I found a sealed letter waiting in my apartment mailbox. No return address, just my name, Ria Lakewood. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in the same looping cursive as my aunt's. You're halfway there. Don't look for the old name, it was never yours. When you stop fearing what you are becoming, the truth will reveal itself. My hands trembled as I read it. She had anticipated every step, every doubt, every crack in my resistance. It was like she'd planned the unraveling of my entire identity long before I even entered this building. That night I dreamed again, the little girl in white, the same voice calling Ria. Only this time she ran toward me, laughing, her eyes bright. When she reached me, she whispered something I couldn't hear, and when I woke I was crying. I didn't know why. Days later, Dr. Moreau assigned me to lead a presentation before the board. Empathy Metrics in Leadership. Standing there, speaking with confidence and composure, I caught a glimpse of myself reflected in the glass wall. I looked poised, graceful, utterly composed. If anyone had told me 6 months earlier that I'd stand in front of executives as Ria Lakewood, I would have laughed. Yet in that moment, I didn't feel like I was pretending anymore. Afterward, one of the board members, an older woman with sharp eyes, approached me. "Your aunt would be proud," she said softly. She believed the company needed someone who understood both sides of the human experience. That's what this was always about. Both sides. The phrase stayed with me. In the following weeks, I stopped correcting anyone who used feminine pronouns. I stopped trying to sound like Rowan. I let my hair down, both literally and metaphorically. I began to blend. Not because I was forced to, but because resisting had become meaningless. The strange part was, I wasn't miserable anymore. I felt lighter, calmer, as though I had been carrying an invisible burden for years, and this experiment had peeled it away. Yet deep inside, a voice still whispered, "This isn't you. It's what they made you." And maybe that was true. But if I couldn't tell the difference anymore, did it matter? As autumn approached, I realized something else. People had started trusting me more, confiding in me, leaning on me. I had become the emotional center of the team, the quiet force that balanced chaos. Somehow, in losing myself, I had gained influence, empathy, and peace. Terrified me. Because I knew that peace wasn't real. It was built on a lie I was beginning to accept as truth. And as I looked in the mirror that night, whispering both names under my breath, Rowan, Ria, only one of them felt alive when spoken aloud. Winter came softly, like a whisper that lingered on every glass surface of the Lakewood Tower. By then I had stopped counting days. I was no longer keeping track of how far I had gone from who I used to be. I had become her. The world around me seemed to agree. Co-workers smiled differently. My voice carried a tone of calm authority, and my name tag, still reading Ria Lakewood, no longer looked like a disguise. Every email, every meeting, every signature reinforced that identity until it wasn't something I performed. It was simply how I existed. But along with that comfort came something I hadn't anticipated. Feeling. Started subtly. I noticed details I never had before. The smell of jasmine in the lobby, the warmth of morning light against my skin, the gentle tremble in my hands when someone praised my work. It was as if the world had deepened in texture. My emotions were richer, layered, and sometimes overwhelming. Dr. Moreau noticed it too. "You're not resisting anymore," he said during one of our sessions. "You've reached emotional resonance." "Meaning?" I asked, though I already knew. He smiled faintly. "Meaning the hormones, the social immersion, and the cognitive restructuring have synchronized. You're not performing femininity anymore, Ria. You're embodying it." The way he said it, with quiet certainty, should have terrified me. But instead I felt calm. Maybe because the chaos of identity had finally settled. Or maybe because I wanted to believe that I'd found peace in the illusion. But illusions have edges, and I was about to cut myself on one. It began with a file that arrived on my desk one evening after hours, marked confidential. Lakewood Legacy Archive. Inside were research notes, audio logs, and a few handwritten annotations. Among them was an audio file titled Miriam Final Session. My hand trembled as I pressed play. Subject: Miriam Lakewood. Entry 211. The Cassandra Protocol has exceeded all projections. Neural mapping confirms identity convergence after sustained hormonal therapy. Emotional cognition expands exponentially. But the danger lies in permanence. Once the subject reaches complete congruence, the previous self cannot be restored. She paused, her voice cracking slightly. I thought I could return to who I was before. But I can't. I don't even remember her name anymore. The recording ended in static. I sat there, staring at the waveform on the screen, the meaning sinking deeper with every second. My aunt hadn't been observing others. She had tested the experiment on herself. She had lived as someone else, completely, irreversibly, until Miriam ceased to exist. Was that what she wanted for me? To continue where she left off. To disappear into someone she thought I truly was. That night I walked out of the tower, leaving my badge behind. I needed to breathe air that didn't taste of recycled secrets. I found myself at the old Lakewood mansion, standing before her portrait, the one that hung in the main hall. But as I stared, something shifted in my perception. The painting didn't just look like her. Looked like me. The same slope of the eyes, the same curve of the mouth. Subtle, impossible similarities that made my skin crawl. My reflection in the glass merged with hers, and for a heartbeat, I couldn't tell us apart. Who were you really, Aunt Miriam? I whispered. And what have you turned me into? The silence in the house was heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Then a voice behind me, gentle, hesitant. Rhea. Turn. It was June, holding a coat, her eyes soft with concern. I've been worried about you. You just disappeared. I needed to see this place again, I said quietly. She stepped closer, studying my face. You look like her, you know. The same calm, the same sadness. Something in me cracked. I hadn't realized how deeply I needed human warmth until she reached out and touched my arm. Simple, grounding contact. My defenses melted. We spent the evening talking in front of the old fireplace. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. I told her everything anyway. About the inheritance, the hormones, the transformation, the videos, the impossible choice my aunt had left me. When I finished, June was quiet for a long moment. Then she said softly, maybe she wasn't trying to punish you. Maybe she was giving you the chance she never had, to live without pretending. Her words echoed inside me long after she left. That night, I looked into the mirror again. The face staring back was undeniably feminine, but the eyes, they were mine. The person in the reflection wasn't a stranger anymore. She felt complete, as though a long-forgotten puzzle had finally fit together. And for the first time, I didn't think of Rowan as the real me. I thought of him as the beginning, a prologue that had served its purpose. Still, there was one truth I couldn't ignore. I had become so deeply immersed in Rhea that I no longer knew if I could ever return. The next day I went back to the tower. Moreau greeted me without surprise, as though he had known I would. You understand now, he said simply. He nodded. You knew all along, didn't you? That I wouldn't be able to go back. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, I didn't know. But your aunt did. He handed me a sealed envelope. Inside, another letter from Miriam. My dearest Rhea, if you've reached this point, then the process is complete. I never wanted to erase you. I wanted to free you. The person you called Rowan was a shadow created by circumstance. But you, Rhea, were the truth I saw the moment you were born. I couldn't tell you then. I had to let you find her yourself. Forgive me. I read it again and again, tears blurring the words until they dissolved into the paper. She hadn't created Rhea. She had revealed her. The realization hit like a storm, a mix of grief, release, and awe. My aunt hadn't sentenced me to live as someone else. She had given me back the self I had buried under years of denial. The corporate sentence was never punishment. It was liberation disguised as obedience. And yet, even freedom can hurt. Because to become Rhea fully, I had to let Rowan die. Spring returned before I noticed it. The frost melted from the Lakewood Tower windows, and with it, the last of my resistance. I had survived a year inside this strange experiment, my aunt's legacy, and somehow I wasn't broken. I was awake. When the one-year contract ended, the board scheduled an exit evaluation. They called it a reintegration meeting, but I knew what it really was. The moment to decide who I would be when the corporate sentence expired. Rowan or Rhea. I sat in the waiting room, staring at two folders on the table before me. One bore the name Rowan Lakewood, employment termination. The other, Rhea Lakewood, permanent appointment. Across from me, Dr. Moreau watched silently. "You don't have to rush," he said. "Identity isn't a door you close. It's one you keep walking through." I opened the first folder, Rowan's. It was thin, containing little more than my original resume and a photo that no longer resembled me. The eyes were distant, unsure. He looked like someone pretending to be alive. Then I opened Rhea's file. It was filled with reports, commendations, new project proposals, evidence of a life that had flourished in the shadow of the experiment. She was confident, capable, real. "What happens if I choose neither?" I asked quietly. "Then you disappear," Moreau said. "Both identities dissolve, legally and professionally. The estate reverts to the foundation. You walk away with nothing but the experience." For a long time I said nothing. Outside, sunlight spilled through the glass, soft and golden. I remembered my aunt's letter, the last words she had written. "You were never meant to live divided." I reached for the second folder. My hand didn't even tremble. "I'm not going back," I said. Moreau nodded once, almost gently. "Then welcome home, Ms. Lakewood." That evening I returned to the mansion one last time. Dust hung in the air, glowing in the late daylight. I walked through each room, tracing my fingers over the furniture, the books, the traces of her life that had guided mine. In her study, I found one final sealed envelope tucked inside a drawer. No name, only a single line written on the front, "For when the mirror finally smiles back." Inside was a small silver locket, the same one she'd worn every day. When I opened it, there was a faded photograph of her younger self beside a child, maybe 2 years old. The child had my eyes. On the back, in her handwriting, "My Rhea." The truth came in fragments, unsteady, unbelievable. The timeline in her journals, the adoption papers I'd never seen, the reason she had watched me so closely as a child. She hadn't simply believed I was meant to be Rhea. She had known. I wasn't just her heir. I was her creation, her continuation, the living part of her she couldn't bear to lose. Tears came easily then, but they didn't hurt. They felt like recognition. I placed the locket around my neck and looked into the mirror above her desk. The woman staring back at me was both familiar and new. Miriam's echo and something entirely my own. For the first time I smiled without hesitation. A few months later, Lakewood Industries announced a new initiative. The Empathy Project. My project. I spoke before a room full of executives, explaining that true understanding and leadership came not from power but from perspective, from walking through the fragile spaces between who we are and who we pretend to be. After the presentation, June found me backstage. "You were brilliant," she said, taking my hand. "You sounded just like her." "Maybe that's the point," I replied softly. "Maybe she never really left." That night, as I left the tower, the city lights reflected against the glass like scattered stars. I thought about Rowan, the ghost who had walked into this building a year ago, uncertain and afraid, and I whispered a quiet farewell. He wasn't gone. He had simply become part of me, folded into the woman who now bore both our memories. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain and new beginnings. I breathed it in, feeling the world settle around me with unfamiliar peace. My corporate sentence had ended. My life had just begun. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to our channel.